time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter. And Stephen Crawford is the District Director for the Maricopa Center for Learning and Innovation at Maricopa Community Colleges in the metropolitan Phoenix area and has over 20 years of experience in working with distance learning programs. During this time, he has worked with a variety of modalities, including delivering courses via satellite, CD-ROM, and online. Due to his work with both online and flipped courses, he has a strong interest in evidence-based practices regarding the use of multimedia. He is also a photographer, videographer, and occasional podcaster. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. It's great to see everyone from around the world. Since I did see Ontario, we can legitimately say that. So thank you all for being here. As I was introduced, I am Stephen Crawford. I'm the District Director here for Maricopa Center for Learning and Innovation, which is out of the district office of the Maricopa Community Colleges. We are 10 individually accredited colleges here in the Phoenix metropolitan area serving Maricopa County. And I'm really glad to be here today to talk about multimedia. Some of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to start by defining the different types of multimedia out there that you can use for instructional purposes. And it's one of those things I think is a very important place to start from, is having a nice framework for this conversation. And then we're going to look at some of the research and what's going out there and then think about how we can apply these. There's a lot of research emerging in a lot of different areas, and there's some really neat trends. So if you've seen any of or part of this presentation in the past, please be aware I have updated it with some recent things I've come across, and I think you'll there's some really interesting pieces coming out. So let's start by defining the different types of multimedia so we can frame the conversation appropriately. And so the way I look at it, there are 4 types of multimedia. You start off with audio, and then you will move into screencasting, video, and then you'll also have voice over PowerPoints and video. So let's look at these individually. Audio presentations. When we think about, we often think about, when we're going to create something for a course, we'll just shoot a video, but there's a lot of reasons why you may not. And so when we think about audio presentations, these can be great for things, obviously, like podcasting, which we're seeing a great resurgence of, especially in the higher ed space with so many wonderful podcasts. I have to give a shout out to Instruction by Design, since I helped start that when I was at ASU. But also we have 2 profs in a pod at Glendale Community College and the Innovation Podcast from South Mountain. So you're seeing these begin to really proliferate as a way from CTLs to communicate to faculty. But you can use audio also for your course introduction, your personal introductions, maybe even your module introductions. It's a great way to kind of just communicate. And some people are using them for lectures. You can use it for student feedback, course announcements. There's a lot of really neat things to do. One of my favorite ways to use audio, and this is where I'll stop going down the list, and that is with interviews. If you're ever at a professional conference and you come across an expert in the field and you're like, oh, I wish the students could hear this person talk about this topic, sit down, pull out your iPhone. It's got a nice little, or Android phone, and pull out the audio app to record, and just simply begin to have an interview with them. Obviously, get permission first, and sit down and have an audio interview with them. It's a really great way to kind of bring the real world into the classroom. Then there's voiceover presentations. And again, you'll see introductions is a great place for this. I mean, this is typically where you take a PowerPoint or whatever your slide deck application is, and you speak over it. And there's, and this is a great way, I find this is a great way to provide lectures and provide a lot of content. And you'll see a lot of faculty who will use this as a tool because the fact that as they're transitioning their face-to-face content into the online environment. Screencasting is another great one, and I love it for doing demos. One of my favorite set of demos I did was with the library a number of years ago, where we were walking nursing students through how to use the different library databases. And we gave them a real world example going, this is the type of nursing question you're going to be asking, and here's how you will use the library databases to find research related to those questions. So by having that contextualized approach as opposed to a generic, this is how you use a database, it's a really nice way to show and help bring that point home and demonstrate to the students, this is how you do it. And then of course there's video, and we see video in a lot of places, and this is one of the things that we look at the stats and the research we're seeing coming from different surveys. This is obviously very popular, with so many of us having a 4K camera in our pockets. If anybody has a phone that was made in the last couple of years, you have a camera that can create video that is at the same quality, if not higher, than your television that you've bought within the last couple of years. And so with that in mind, it's really easy to create video, but what does that mean? And should you even do it sometimes? I mean, which of these four formats is the best depends on what your educational and pedagogical needs are. And so we're going to look through some of the research on that and talk about what that is, because anybody can aim a camera in a certain direction, but it doesn't make us Steven Spielberg. I wish it did, because I aim a camera at a lot of things, and there are times where I wish I could just make that next Indiana Jones movie. So what can we learn from the research? And there's a lot of really great questions to ask. So I've got a set of questions we're going to go through, and there's going to be a poll question. So we'll start with the first one. Does including video in my course make a difference for my students? And so this is where we'll see hopefully a poll question pop up here. Oh, there it is. So I'll give you a moment to answer this poll question. Okay, and let's go ahead and get those results. So we see a lot of yes, and we see a lot of depends, and actually it looks like only one person said no. So this is great. So this is a very nice split. So let's take a look at what the research tells us. And I'm trying to, whoops, there we go. So let's start with the yes part. There is research that does say yes, that it does make a difference. So for an example, there was one study that indicated that instructor-generated video content does have a positive and moderate influence on student satisfaction with engagement in asynchronous online courses. So we do know that it does help build that connection, and that's one of the things that we see. Some of the newer research out there that I've come across was talking about specifically faculty who use publisher-generated learning materials. They said those faculty that replace the publisher-generated learning materials with instructor-generated video lectures that placed a greater emphasis on conceptual learning also positioned the course instructor more prominently in the role of course provider. So it created this stronger connection. So that actually enhanced the instructor's teaching presence in the online learning environment. So we do know it helps show that the faculty member is the expert by having them visible and as the content provider. And so that's one thing to think about, not just taking somebody else's video all the time, but occasionally having your own video as well. We did see in the Kaltura does a wonderful survey every year, and they're known as being a video hosting service for a lot of higher education institutions. So in their 2018 survey, they identified that 92% of the people they surveyed believed that it increased student satisfaction with the learning experience. And then they also thought it had a positive impact on increasing student achievement, increasing teacher satisfaction, increasing the educator collaboration and professional development, and making onboarding process of new students more smoothly. So we're seeing a lot of people using video to kind of get new students oriented to how to get as they're trying to get onto the program. Now, this is where we're going to start to transition into the it depends, because we also see where many students have also commented that they no longer viewed PowerPoints that were included. So for example, faculty members would often include a PowerPoint deck, and then they would include the video of them lecturing the PowerPoint deck. Well, we're seeing that transition move away from the PowerPoint files and sticking straight to the video type files. Now, here's the but part. Here's where it depends. We're seeing that the fraction of students accessing lecture-oriented videos decrease during the semester. So you may have a moderately high level of engagement where the students are watching the videos, regardless of the format. And then what happens is, as the semester goes on, they stop relying on them and they stop watching them. And we also know that when that's the only source of the content, that's detrimental sometimes. We also see that when little in-class time was spent describing or working on laboratory activities. So this was specifically for a lab class where they did all the content on how to do a lab was done online. And so there was no in-class time talking about it. They saw that you had a high engagement rate on those students. But what happened is, again, we saw the same thing where students just didn't access the videos towards the end. And one of the things they also saw was that video length impacted that as well, especially as it increased. And one of the things to note is that there is little correlation between student engagement with video lectures and student performance. So all because a student is watching the videos doesn't mean that they're actually going to perform well. So here are, and we get this question a lot. I will actually combine all of these references and get that document, and I'm going to get it done hopefully tonight for you, Nancy. So all the references I cite will be included after each section, but I'll get this out there as well. So how long is too long? And so this is a great time for our next poll question. And think about it. How long of a video is too long for students to engage and watch?
Oh, shoot, Stephen, I didn't get this one.
Okay, that's okay. Not a problem.
I apologize. I didn't see it.
Not a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to show this wonderful graph. And so what you're going to see here is where, this is again from Wistia, which is another company that kind of focuses on higher ed. And so, and this is a better data set than YouTube. And so what they're showing here is the number of students who, you take a 20-minute video. And so the 70% of their students clicked in and stayed engaged through the first minute. And you can see it drops off a little bit as we move through. So what advice do we get from this? The answer is 6 minutes or less does make a lot of sense for a lot of our videos. And this kind of goes into a lot of different learning theories. We see that when we think about the concept of chunking and chunking content into smaller bits, and I think this is a really nice approach to take, and we see this supported in the research, where with the students who are watching videos in a room, that in-person students indicated a preference for the shorter videos. They wanted 1.5 to 3 minutes, while students who were online actually said, we'll take 3 to 7 minutes long. And for those of you who listen to podcasts, if you're like I am, often you'll look at how much time do I have? And if you go, well, I'm driving for 1.5 hours, so therefore listening to an hour and a half podcast makes plenty of sense. But if you only have 20 minutes, you're going to look for the shorter ones to listen to in that window, because you probably don't want to stop in the middle. And even though it remembers quite well and transfers between devices. But we do, and the reason why I bring that up is because we've seen the research where video impact does impact viewers' decisions. Now, this is where things get interesting. And I'm seeing some of the things flash by in the comments about video length. And we think about the Netflix world, and we think about binge watching and everything else. And one of the things is that the mean maximum time for college age participants from one study, willingness to watch was about 4.5 minutes. And we see, so we're getting those low numbers. But we see that again, but when you look at 3 to 4 minutes is the most that 18 to 29-year-olds are willing to watch. You keep seeing and hearing those numbers. But here's the problem with those numbers. We also know that those same people will watch a 3-hour YouTube of Joe Rogan. We also know that those students will binge watch a series on Netflix that may have 10 episodes that are 15 minutes each in one sitting. We know, so it starts to become the question of the question of length should be a factor, but at the same time, the question of what are you doing in that should be a factor. When you look, and I did not include this in this research, but there's a book out there called Brain Rules, and they talked about television shows. And there's a reason why television shows are split into 5 acts, especially an hour-long television show. So an hour-long television show is 42 minutes long by the time you get rid of all the commercials, and it's split into 5 acts. And the idea is that those are chunks that will keep you engaged long enough. So they do tricks to keep you engaged. That's the reason why people stayed in the movie theater for almost 3 hours to watch the last Avengers movie, because they had that programmed, that there were scene shifts that caused you to mentally stay part and stay engaged the entire time without getting bored. If it was just one long interview, unless the interview was super, super good, odds are you wouldn't sit there for all 3 hours unless you had some other motivation to watch it. And so those are the things that makes this whole time question very interesting. So by itself, what I'm going to say is stick to about 6 minutes or less when possible, but go as long as you need to. And my recommendation from the research is, again, to focus on chunking your content, because if you've got this interview and it's a nice continuous interview and it's 45 minutes long and it's engaging and it's a lot of great content and it sucks you in, then put it up there like that. But if there are parts where, you know what, I ask a question and there's a nice easy part to chunk it into parts. I will also tell you, from a production standpoint, having it in smaller segments is easier when it comes to updating material. And that's one of the things to think about as well. And so here are some references again on where some of this is coming from. So the next question is, do students actually want to see you talk? Do they want to see your face on screen the entire time? And we have a poll question for that.
The poll should pop up in a window in front of you in Zoom. We're actually using the polls through Zoom, just FYI.
And of course, one of the worst things you can do is have dead air like that. So let me talk a little bit. So as we're getting this finished up, think about a couple of different things. What do you like to see and what's important? And that'll be a good guide. Okay, so a lot of people are figuring out that depends is a great way to go when you can't make up your mind or if you think I'm tricking you. And we see a good split on, do students want to see you talk? So based off of that, here is what we're seeing. The answer is not really. They don't really want to see you. Now, we know that videos that intersperse an instructor's talking head with slides are more engaging than just the slides alone. So we've seen that from one study. And it's important to build that human connection. And so there's the support for the yes part. But in general, they're not looking at you. And sometimes they're not even looking at their computer monitor. They will have multiple tabs open and the video will be running in a different window if it's just you talking the entire time. But if you're doing a course intro or a module intro, and it's a very short 2-3 minute video, yeah, they'll probably watch you and it'll be a positive because they're making that connection. And we're seeing, so there was one, let's see here. So they showed that results showed, one study, I'm going to quote one here that says, results showed that significantly less attention was devoted to the task when the instructor was present in a modeling example. So the example here is that the instructor was showing how to do something and they were modeling, this is how you do it. When the instructor was visible on screen, they actually paid more attention to the instructor than to the actual modeling of what was being done. And that's because the students, like most people, we're trying to look at the person's face. We are innately designed to look at people's faces. And so when that face is available, we're going to keep looking up at it, even if we should be looking at their hands doing something. But at the same time, we also found that, faces may not be a distractor in social instructional situations. So there's a lot of difference. They're having some questions here. Is what is best? But we do know that the students, the face can sometimes kind of be an issue. And this is also thinking about from the cognitive load standpoint, that sometimes it's relevant for promoting student engagement. So for an example, when telling a story, it can be very effective to show the storyteller's face, or it could be to show an animation of the story. Showing both may actually be a distractor. And I think this is, and the reason why I bring this up is that we've seen from the earlier days, and especially from my days when I was doing this with television-based distance learning, we'd often do picture-in-picture. You'd have the slide deck up in the screen, and then you would have in the bottom corner a person who is live produced, and you'd see their picture in the bottom talking to the classroom, because we had a model where the instructor was teaching to a classroom and then was broadcast via satellite to remote sites. And everyone's, and from a broadcast standpoint, it's like, nope, you got to see the instructor, you got to see that person the entire time. But what we're seeing is that's not the case. And so, you need to do enough of it to build that connectedness, but at the same time, you also need to not do too much of it, because it can become a distractor. So if you're not on screen, what do students really want to see?
Stephen, for this one, you had said open-ended, so I didn't add anything.
All right,
and I can't do open-ended questions. I apologize. I can only do like A, B, C, or D type stuff.
Yeah, and I thought about that afterwards. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So there are two ways you can categorize the research that we're seeing so far. One of them is demonstrations. Students really want to see demonstrations when it comes to video itself. This is one of the reasons why the con-style tablet drawings were so powerful and still are. And those are seen to be more engaging than PowerPoint slides. And give you an example, for those of you who teach chemistry or anything math-based, almost anything math-based, and you're writing out formulas, there's different pens you can buy where you can draw out and write out the equations. Students would rather see you write out the equation as you're talking and just see the equation being drawn out than a pre-printed slide with the pieces coming up one at a time. And that, because what that does, it helps them focus. And that's one of the reasons why you saw that the con style works so well, because you have that verbal channel of information that is perfectly aligning with what's being drawn. And so any problem solving thing really works really well there. And we're seeing a lot of research to support that. When it comes to brief how-to videos, we also see that there's a preference for the screencasting of instructional videos as opposed to other ways to do things. And we see that survey results show that role play videos that are well produced but are brief and of high quality really go over well with students as well. Now, the problem is we don't know what high quality means, because that's a definition that's still in flux. So when you have those demos, again, they don't really want to necessarily see you, they want to see the screens. And I kind of set that up a little bit earlier when I was talking about screencasting in the beginning. Another thing that people want to see is highlighting of key information. And so this way you can target specific things and get that into the processing of working memory. So one of the reasons why you see so few words on my slides is because I want you to think about certain things. When it comes to video, I want you to remember if they're not seeing you, there's two things I want you to remember. And that is demonstrations and highlighting of key information. If I had both of those on the screen at the same time, you're going to be thinking about both of those at the same time. But by having one at a time, that helps you process and think about, this is what we're talking about. And we've seen that by doing it this way, that reduces the extra load that helps novice learners with a task by determining what parts of a complex situation is important. And so this is a great way to kind of reduce cognitive load for our students. And again, keeping those brief how-to videos, I think that's one of the reasons why you see the DIY culture and the maker culture so popular on YouTube, where they go, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to do, and it's just one simple thing. I'm going to teach you how to change a tire. I'm going to teach you how, they don't go, oh, well, while we're here, let me show you the brakes while I'm at it. No, you're focused on one thing. Again, it's about reducing cognitive load. And that's why you see so many of those popular how-to videos where they focus on one thing and one thing only. So should you include video of you tutoring students? And this is a fun one. Because we've seen this model. You think about the model of where we come from in our roots in distance learning, especially with the television-based ones. I started with distance learning in the mid-90s, and our model was to have a classroom full of students with the instructor, and we record and broadcast that. And so a lot of people are still wondering, is that a good thing or not? I know people are worried about FERPA and some privacy issues, but we'll talk about what that might mean. Obviously, the environment, the legal environment's changed quite a bit since I started in this world. All right, and so our results show a lot of people saying no, a lot of 54%, 30% says depends, and 16 says yes. So I'm going to say that this is one that surprised me, and I happened to had a conversation with the researchers themselves. The answer is maybe. It's a really interesting situation. I had to be sold on this, and when I saw the research on this, I was like, okay, this might be going somewhere. So the idea that you're seeing come about now is that you will have a faculty member who will be in a studio, and they will have maybe one or two students who they are teaching to. So these are effectively actors for the most part. These may be students who took the class previously. They may be people who are currently in the class, but it's done in a studio setup. So the privacy and FERPA question is not applicable here because it's kind of a staged setup. And the explanation that we're seeing is that by having the two T's, as they call them in the research, having those students serve as a model of learning, because you as a student can watch them and see them process what's being taught, and then that will help, and then you can start imitating those behaviors. So it was kind of hard for me a little bit, and I'm seeing some of the comments pop up about the positive peer pressure and the peer empathy. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here, is that you're seeing a situation where the students are looking at them, and what's nice for the faculty member as the presenter is that they're presenting material, and maybe the questions were staged, maybe they weren't. It depends on how well things were planned ahead of time. And so we can, and sometimes, and this is one of the pieces that the research noted, is that seeing the conflict with the student and trying to work their way through it, because that's going to be the hard part, is that you don't want the students to be, and you think about, and for those of us of a certain age, we'll think about Mr. Wizard. And we always remember he had a young person who was always asking questions. And that person was kind of the proxy for the audience. And so you have to have a person who is able to ask the questions in a way that an average person would ask, but not be so informed that they're skipping over things. And again, it kind of goes to that expert's blind spot. Why can an expert not explain the basics of their job? It's because they've been doing it for so long, they can't remember the details anymore. And so that's one of the things we have to be careful of in selecting that. So it is an interesting model. And it's one that it's taken me a little while to kind of get used to, but I think it's a really interesting one. And so like, here's the, right there, there's like one major study on that, but there's some other work being done. Okay, so now, do I need to have a studio set up to get my high quality video? And this is one of those things, again, we think about professionals and, and we've seen a whole profession grow up around broadcast television, and we've seen that come to higher education. And then we've seen the whole digital, how things have changed. So this is one of those interesting questions about what do you need and how do you go about doing things. All right, and our survey says, I love it. 82% says no. And I have friends who are videographers, and they kind of want to strangle me every time I say this, but the bottom line is, no, you really don't. But, and there's always a but, right? So let's talk about what you do need. So obviously we're going to start with the no. There was I had the honor of being on a doctoral committee for a student who finished her dissertation recently, and she studied specifically course introduction videos, and what she looked at was, she had a group, the control group was done in the studio. She had the instructor in the studio, highly produced, green screen in the background, cleaned everything up, nice audio, great lighting, all that good jazz. And then she had another group who the same faculty member with the exact same script sat in front of her computer in her office and recorded the exact same words. And what we found, or what she found, was that there was no statistical significance when you looked at the difference between the high production and what she called low production video. As far as when it came to students' perception of the student to instructor connection when compared to instructor intent. She also found that there was no statistically significant difference between high production and low production video in the area of communication. And so, okay, this goes back to the basic. If there's no significant difference, now we go to other factors that really can't be measured as much, like preference. Students actually preferred what she called the low production, the done in her office video, because of the fact that she felt that the students kind of felt that it made the instructor feel more human. They saw more. Now, at the same time, the high production video was considered the most accurate in portraying instructor intent, but the students they liked the office one better. And so that's a very interesting point of view when you think about that in the setup of the study. We know that when doing videos, it's important that we look at how this can be done. And so, we know that, and this is where the broadcast folks and I differ. I worked with a team once and had this one person who was like, you have to do edutainment. When you look at the broadcast, this is what we do. You have to have background music over the whole thing. You have to have this emotional bit going. You have to have all these pieces. And what we've discovered is those are all cognitive distractors. So when you look at the broadcast standpoint, what a lot of folks want to do in that studio environment is they want to add background music or complex backgrounds. And again, with the office, that's one of the things to be careful about. It's like you may have a nice set of books on the shelf, but that can be distracting. And that's one of the things I found. And if you look at, again, I'm a sports guy. So when watching ESPN and watching Sports Center, you will see when they're interviewing different people, a lot of those people have home studios now, and it's just nice, simple bookshelves that are not overstuffed, that have a couple of personal items that often relate to the sport they're talking about. That builds a collection. If that got overcrowded, that could become a distractor. So you really need to be careful about things like that. And so complex backgrounds, and then again, adding the music, extra features with animation can be a distractor. So you really want to keep it simple. And that's where we get to, I want to hit one more thing on that, but I'm going to get to that with my final reflection at the end, because there's some very important research relating to this topic as well that needs to be discussed. But here's the most important thing. Audio matters. If you are shooting the greatest video for your class outside and all we can hear is the traffic going by, let's say you're talking about traffic engineering and you're talking about flow of traffic or pollution or whatever your topic happens to be, and your decision is to stand on an overpass with traffic going below you, it's going to look beautiful. It's going to make your point so well. And no one's going to hear you and no one's going to care because you're going to be drowned out by the traffic. And that's one of the things to keep in mind. Audio matters. And the one thing that we've seen is that voice quality and that narration is so important. And you need, and that's one of the things about audio. So I've discovered over the years, and I don't have any research to support this, but standing according to people who do this for a profession makes your audio better. So dirty little secret, I'm at a sitting desk right now. I haven't sat down once. And so I'm hoping that variability in my audio is a positive, because it's showing the enthusiasm, and that's where you can really make things work, because you have to have that clear audio. I just saw one of the comments talk about B-roll. For those of you who don't do video work on a regular basis, when you shoot video, I'm going to pick on the news folks, when they shoot video and they're shooting the interview, that's A-roll. And then what happens is before and after that, the camera person will shoot video of the background of different things, and that's called B-roll, and they'll drop that in. So using my traffic scenario, having a person do audio away from the traffic and then get the B-roll showing the traffic is much better. But that now gets into complex production. And that's one of the things I want to make clear is that you don't have to get into huge, complex things. Okay, so let's talk about captions. This is one of my favorite ones. If you don't have any students who are deaf or hard of hearing, do you really need to have captions? And I know some of you are going to answer this from a legal standpoint. And I'm seeing some people in the chat shout out universal design. So what you're going to find here is that there is, and 89% say yes. And what you're going to find is there is been long-standing studies that answer this question. We know that closed captions help with comprehension of dialogue that is spoken very quickly with accents, mumbling, or background noise. So it becomes a channel to help people. We know that video that mentions full names, brand names, technical terminology provides clarity for the viewer. Some of the very early work on lecture capture in it was one of the Michigan schools. I want to think it was University of Michigan. And this is, I've been trying to find the study again. I haven't got my hands on it yet. But they did early podcasting and video work. And the reason why students were listening to the podcasts of that was because they were trying, it was a dental school, if I remember correctly, and they're trying to get the technical terms right. And I'm sitting there imagining, could you imagine that was closed captioned? It'd be even easier to get those technical terms. Here's the thing for those of us, who are watching the demographics of the nation change. Here in Arizona, 3 of our institutions in Maricopa community colleges are Hispanic serving. So we know that from other research that English, for those who English is a second language, closed captions is critical because it helps them follow along. It makes it easier for them. And then let's talk about the non-deaf or hard of hearing people. When I fly, I will watch Netflix, and I will watch Netflix with closed captions on, because even though I'm wearing headphones like I am now, sometimes it's really hard to hear, even on an airplane, because of that background noise. So I will turn on closed captions to make sure I don't miss any key words. We are seeing, and again, the research shows this, we are seeing students who are doing this at work who will turn on the closed captions so they don't disturb their cubimate next door. They will turn on closed captions because they're at home after dinner doing the online videos for their online course, and they don't want to wake their children. So it's not just about deaf or hard of hearing. Everybody is using it. And so we're of all different populations. And so that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And we know that, closed captions have reached that tipping point where you just need to do it. It really needs to just be something you do, not because the law says so if you're in the United States, because it's the right thing to do for our students, especially those who are, again, like this, talking about hard of hearing, or deaf, English as second language, or just trying to do it at work or with their kids asleep. Now, a recent study I was reading was talking about auto captions and compared those. And that's something to be very careful about. If you're relying on YouTube's auto captions, you really need to kind of think about this a little bit differently, because they work great when they're presented accurately. And what they did is they had a study they did where they took adults like us, and I think it was for, let's see, do I have it in my notes? I don't have it in my notes, but I believe it was for an 8th grade science class. And And what happened was these are adults who knew the content, and they gave some of them the video with audio and closed captions, and some they gave them with video with just the closed captions, no audio. And what we found was there was a significant difference in that study between those two groups. People who should have already known the content had a significant difference in the quiz on the content. So if adults who already know the content or have been exposed to it are having difficulty by relying on the captions, imagine the students who have no experience with the content, how they're struggling with inaccurate captions. And so that's something to keep in mind. We always talk about how important that is. And we always say, well, if the captions are 80% accurate and that's your only channel of information, you're already starting behind. Well, now we're seeing studies that confirm that. So that's something to keep in mind as you're doing captions. So let's talk about the future a little bit. There's a couple of emerging trends and I think are worth talking about. And so the first one is interactive videos. So these are the things that we're not doing yet, but we're seeing that there's a lot of surveys. 2018 Kaltura again said, I think 97% indicated that interactive videos, and this is video that changes depending on viewer behavior. So, you know, the most popular one out there is Netflix when they had that choose your own adventure type of video recently. And I saw someone just say the same thing. And so this is one of the things that I was working on this with a case study where, you know, the idea was that you take the role and you either do A or B, and depending on which one you chose would show a next video. And that next video would then give you a path. You do A, B, or C. And then depending on where you went, depending on how you finished. And so we're beginning to see that emerge. One of the things holding that back, like most things, is technology. But that's one of the things that's emerging. Lecture capture, and I'm going to be an old crank. I don't know why this is still a big thing. We've been seeing the Kaltura survey show that it's been progressing in 2014, especially with flipped classrooms. It's like I'm not a big fan of lecture capture. Let me just say that straight up. And I'll give a reason for that here in a moment. But we've seen that grow from 51% to 60% by 2018 was where people were saying this is going to be a major thing. And now they're saying 70% of the respondents says this is a big thing. The reason why I'm not a big fan of lecture capture in the classroom, and let me phrase it that way specifically, is that I'm a strong believer in the flipped classroom. So I believe that the classroom should be an active learning environment, not a passive learning environment. So if you're going to lecture, do it offline and do it with these other wonderful tools and do it with the appropriate media, whether it's video, audio, or screencasting or voiceover slides. And that way you can present content online in a more logical fashion that's just cleaner. And that way the online, the classroom experience is not a lecture-based experience. This is one that I'm finding interesting, video-based discussions. And so there's one study out there where they were looking at this pretty closely, where they had video-enabled discussions versus text-enabled discussions. And what they discovered was that video-based discussions were significantly higher on a social measure for sociability, social presence, and the social space. And that they also rated significantly higher for teacher presence as well. So instead of your traditional text-based discussion board, everybody was responding via video. They'd hit the button in the LMS and the camera would come on and you respond, and then you would hit stop and it would get posted. So this is a trend that we're beginning to see occur. And that's something that I think is worth paying attention to. And students also indicated that they really liked that type of discussion because the tool made collaboration much easier and more productive, because it was possible now to kind of get to know your group mates more, is how they defined it, and their strengths and weaknesses. And because you could now pick up on those verbal and nonverbal cues. And so that's something worth looking at more. And this is another one that I'm seeing a lot more emergence on, and I've hit on it in the past, but now we're beginning to see some studies on that. In fact, Kaltura shows that this has risen from 32 to 35%, now 37% as people this past year in 2019. So those are the last 2017, 18, and 19 percentages, is that this is something that institutions and respondents are beginning to experiment with. There's one study where they found that independent t-tests found no significant difference in student perceptions of quality and delivery between video and text mediums when it came to the actual feedback from faculty on assignments, whether it's versus text versus video. But the qualitative analysis showed that the video version identified several advantages and disadvantages. That students and instructors reported the feedback tended to be more conversational, supportive, and more fully developed when communication was by video than was possible or even practical by text. Now, the problem they came across was that because when you get the video comments, you end up, one of the things about the video comments is you end up having what they found is a significantly higher word count used in video as opposed to in text, and that you had the nonverbal cues were present. Now, here's the however part. Students and instructors all agreed that the feedback was more convenient and efficient, but it was less efficient to students to listen to, and that contradicted some previous studies as well. And it was also sometimes, harder for the faculty member to do because you really had to kind of, get the camera on. But so sometimes it got skipped over and not paid attention to as closely as it might have been. So as we're getting close to the end of our time, I do want to provide one final reflection before kind of hitting the question and answers with the time we have left. And this came from a recent, I think this came from the Kaltura survey again, and it came from another one as well, another research paper. The development of audio and video materials has been declared a skill, really, that's important for everybody. And so what we're seeing now is that we need to be in a position that every faculty member has the ability to create a screencast quickly and on their own. And they have to be able to do this to model for their own students, because we need to be teaching these skills to them as well. We need to be, if we become more familiar and more comfortable using multimedia, whether it's screencasting or the web or video or just plain audio or whatever it is, we should be doing this more. And we're seeing this come up in fact, I think the study was talking about what world-class faculty do. And so if we're not doing this and we're not modeling this behavior, then our students won't either. And then on top of that, we need to be creating assignments that allow our students to use this medium as well. And I know some of the English comp folks I've talked to over the years, and I had this conversation recently with some of the folks here in the district. My comment was, while video is important, you look at every good YouTube video, odds are they scripted and wrote it out before. The art of language is not dead. We need to change how we look at it and recognize that the written language and the verbal language needs to come together a little bit closer. And we need to recognize that is happening. And so we are seeing that. And because we need to recognize, and this is what one person said, they should be able to write for the web, and writing for the web is not the same as writing a paper for an academic conference. They should be able to write or look at things from a visual perspective in terms of graphic design and make things. So that's something that we really need to think about when it comes to helping our faculty. Now, here's another piece that's very important. And if you're a CTL director or an instructional designer, this challenge goes to you. While most institutions report that their faculty can at least create some video, and that's at 91%, I believe, of the Kaltura survey, it's pointed out that some availability is not the same thing as full availability. And what we find out through this survey is that more than 50% of our educators do not have full access to easy-to-use capture tools. And our students, 63%, do not have full access to create video. And 85% of faculty have some access to the physical equipment they need. However, only 68% of the students have that. And so we really need to think about what we're doing and how we're using our tools. Again, I'll point out that when you think about, and I being an iPhone person, I always say iPhone, but I'm also including Android. But in one case, we've had full motion pictures shot on an iPhone. Now, mind you, they did add some extra nice lenses to it, to the front of the camera, but we've seen people shoot full full in the theater movies that have been out in pop culture that were shot exclusively on iPhone. So you've seen this for music videos for years. And so this is something that we really need to think about. And so the suggested action is that educational institutions just need to get into this and make an investment. We need to increase our investment in tools and training to support staff and students that will allow them to deliver on those expectations. So those are some of my final pieces I wanted to include. And again, here's some of those you get award-winning faculty online teaching practices. So that's what they're telling us from their recent research. So at this point, let's go ahead and hit the Q&A and we'll go from there. So Nancy, do you want to pick questions and read them to me, or do you want me to kind of go through? Because I do have my iPad up.
Why don't you go ahead and go through them, and you can kind of see what you may have already, if you've already discussed it during your presentation, you can go ahead and dismiss that question and because you'll know better what you've talked about already.
Okay. All right. I'm not seeing much in the Q&A panel I'm looking at.
Okay, I see 36 questions.
All right, let me hit this button. Oh, let me hit a different button then. Okay. Let's see here. So yeah, so the question about the research. So I've got those references that you'll see, the 4 types of multimedia, and it was 4. And I think and I've done some writing on this in the past. And on that note, I'm in the process of writing a series of articles for QM that will give practical advice on how to do this type of work. And so when you think about audio, you think about voiceover slides, you think about screencasting, and the difference between, we think about voiceover slides, those are still images, whereas screencasting is motion images, and then you can move into straight video. And we do see some, and this is coming from Phil, about we talked about some of the quality issues. It really can be difficult sometimes, and the question then becomes, do we need a performer on camera? And I think the answer is no. I think if we get those, and like that last piece I was talking about, some of those graphic images, there's some basic things that we can teach faculty to do. And when I do a workshop, I teach the rule of thirds, which is great for balancing things out, and helping the eye and how to use white space. I think a lot of times, the worst thing we can do is just get into, I have all these features, let me use them. Here's a trick. And this is, and this is what I do for all of my, when I do a voiceover slide presentation, I begin every slide with an inhale. And the reason why I do that is because when you look at horror movies, one of the tricks they do is they actually cut out every time a person inhales on screen. So what happens is, if you don't see the person on screen inhale, you start to hold your breath with them a little bit, and it helps build tension. So I just kind of want to, sometimes just like that, just to relax. And it maybe not that loud, but it's clear that I'm breathing, I'm relaxing, you should be relaxing. And I think that's part of it as well, because you are sharing your emotion and your passion at the same time. I'm going through quickly. And if I skip over something, I apologize. Yeah, and the word engagement, I hate the word engagement, because the word engagement, and this is from Crystal asking, does engagement mean passive watching of videos? And unfortunately, in the video world, that's exactly what it means. It means you sat and you watched it. And I hate that word, and I hate how that's used in research, especially for marketing materials when it comes to places like Kaltura. But it's the word they use. So yeah. And like I said, we haven't seen too much on the interactivity side. And this Laura was asking about learning differentiation between videos that have some sort of interactivity. What I would say is, this is where I think chunking is a very important thing. So when I was involved in online course design, I would always recommend, you would have a short introductory video to kind of introduce what you're about to learn with a couple of key questions to think about before the student started reading the chapter. And then maybe you would have something in between the videos, but not necessarily always. So that's one of the things to think about. I don't think it has to be embedded in the video. And the reason why I'll say that is because, again, that comes down to the tools we have available. Sometimes it's just easier to just record the video, put it in the learning management system, and then let the learning, so if you have a series of 4 or 5 videos, then maybe have some sort of formative assessment after they finished that block. But that way they can, and then when that happens, if they have issues on the quiz, and let's say it's an automated quiz, you can redirect them to a particular video and say, look at this one again. And because it's a short video, then that's easy to watch as opposed to, and scrub to minute 22 and start there for the next 5 and then go 5 minutes. So that's one of the things I look at. And Suzanne's asking about length by subject matter. And I haven't seen much about that. And usually what happens is, like, when you get that, when you have that chance to, you've got that top speaker who's coming to visit your campus and they're giving that hour-long, presentation, and you have a chance to record it. Sometimes the answer is just drop that in the course and leave it as is, whether it's an astronomer or whether it's somebody in healthcare, or politics, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes the answer is it's an hour-long video. It is what it is, and the content actually works. And cutting it up is actually I would say cut it up if there's only a couple of pieces you want out of it. But if the whole thing it's just easier to watch it for everybody involved, and that's sometimes what you need to do.
Stephen, we have several individuals watching through Facebook Live, and we have a question there. Are there resources that you can suggest to learn about how to learn the technology?
My recommendation is just pick your favorite tool and just learn it inside and out. So for an example, some of my favorite tools is TechSmith's Camtasia, because it works on both Mac and Windows, and just learn it inside and out and what it can do. Some of my other favorites are Adobe Spark, because I can do that on my iPad. I also do a lot of my video editing on my iPad. So I use iMovie quite a bit. So I would say really pick a tool. And when I say pick a tool, notice I did not say Adobe Premiere, because that's filmmaking. That's like using a sledgehammer to install the roof on your house. Yes, the nails will get pounded in, but so will a lot of other things. And so, just use the right tool for the right job. And so that's why a lot of times I gravitate towards, and I hate to buzz market certain companies, but those are the ones I tend to use.
Okay, one more.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for coaching faculty on camera presence? For example, along the lines of public speaking, but tailored to speaking to the camera.
So one of the things, it's the hard part is we always want to have our notes taped right below the camera and to make things easier. And the problem with doing that is I can see my eyes shift down. So if I'm watching you, I can see your eyes shift down. If you look straight at the camera, you're talking directly to the student. So you want to look at the camera as much as possible. And that's one of the problems with mobile phones in general, is that we keep wanting to look at ourselves on the screen and not at the little dot. And so we just have to train ourselves. And I still make that mistake a lot. I did a selfie right before here. And what you didn't see if you're on Twitter is the one where I looked at myself and said, oh, that looks horrible. And then I deleted it. And then I made sure I looked at the dot on my camera, and that looked much better. So that's one of the things I always say is look at the camera. And with those webcams right above our monitors, we want to look at our monitor. One of the things when it comes to editing also is don't worry about flubs. You do not get a do-over in the classroom if you get tripped over your tongue. Don't worry about it. It shows that you're human. You don't have to, you're not creating an NPR type of video or audio. You're human. Let your students know you're human as well.
Okay, Stephen, I'm sorry, we'll have to wrap it up here, but Stephen's contact information is listed on the screen. So if you'd like to contact him with any questions that may not have been answered, you'll be able to do that. And Stephen, what you mentioned, you'll have some resources that you're compiling to share. Is that Did
Yeah,
I
so
understand that correctly?
yeah, that's correct. So I'm in the
Okay.
process of working with QM on writing some articles on some practical advice on how to meet some of the specific review standards. What's interesting is I had a really great setup of articles I was looking towards, and then what ended up happening was as I was updating this, I'm going in the wrong direction. So I think the new direction I'm moving in will be much better, and I think you'll enjoy it quite a bit. And it's going to be practical advice. How to address some of these issues, how to take that traditional hour-long voiceover PowerPoint. And I saw one person had that question. I had a faculty member who insisted it had to be 3 hours because they're used to teaching in a 3-hour classroom, and talk about how to have those conversations and how to chunk things up and how the research supports that. So we're going to talk about some of those methodologies with some practical advice on how to implement this there.
Okay, great. And this session is being recorded, so we'll be sending out a link to the recording shortly after the session. And Corey just shared away, for those of you who are interested in all the great comments that were in the chat, Corey just posted the instructions to save the chat conversation. So thank you all so much for attending. Our National Distance Learning Week next year will be November 9th through the 13th in 2020. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
Glad to be part of this. Thank you, everyone, and looking forward to answering any questions you might have.